So imagine watching mortgage rates basically double over a relatively short period of time.
Right.
If you know anything about real estate, your immediate expectation is that the market is going to just freeze solid. You'd expect to look out your window and see for sale signs, gathering cobwebs, price cuts everywhere, and just a total standstill in buyer activity.
Yeah, complete gridlock.
Exactly. But instead, you look out your window and you see this massive bidding war erupting on a very average, three-bedroom house right across the street.
Which is wild, right?
Right.
Because it's a profound disconnect between what traditional economic theory tells us should happen and what's actually happening on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, the traditional rule book says that when the cost of borrowing skyrockets, demand naturally plummets.
Mm-hmm.
But the current landscape is
Right.
defying that logic in a really fascinating way.
Right. And that is exactly the focus of our deep dive today. Welcome in, everyone. We are pulling from an incredibly insightful piece of source material today titled Rising Demand and the New Calculus of Home Value.
It's a great piece.
It really is. And our mission today is to decode this highly noticeable shift in the market. We need to figure out the mechanisms behind why buyer activity is surging right now despite those high rates.
Mm-hmm.
And most importantly, what this invisible shift means for your bottom line. And I mean your bottom line. Whether you are currently pre-approved and frantically packing boxes, or if you're just sitting comfortably on your couch with absolutely zero intention of moving for the next 10 years.
Which is a crucial distinction, honestly.
Yeah.
Because the overarching premise we need to tackle first is this assumption that a market only matters to the people actively transacting in it.
Right.
That is a dangerous financial blind spot. I mean, the biggest mistake you could make right now is assuming the market is the same as it was last year. The market is shifting the ground beneath your feet regardless of whether you are actively paying attention to it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because as I was reading through the source material, I realized my previous mental model was just totally wrong.
How so?
Well, I used to think of this market like a game of musical chairs, where everyone thought the music was paused and everyone was just frozen in place.
Yeah. That's a common way to look at it.
Right, but that's too passive. Suddenly, the tempo has actually sped up and people are frantically scrambling for seats again. The music never stopped.
I really like that framing. It's much more accurate. You know, what we're looking at is what economists call the lock-in effect. You have millions of homeowners sitting on historically low pandemic-era mortgage rates.
Like what, 2.5% or 3%?
Exactly. And mathematically, it makes absolutely no sense for them to trade that incredibly cheap debt for a new mortgage at 6 or 7%.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. So they refuse to sell. And that creates an artificial scarcity of inventory. The supply side of the equation is just artificially constricted.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The source points out that despite that tight inventory, despite the lack of chairs in our musical chairs, game buyer activity is noticeably picking up compared to this time last year.
Yes, significantly.
And we aren't just talking about casual window shoppers scrolling through listings on their phones at 2 in the morning.
No, not at all.
The data shows more direct inquiries, a surge in physical showings, and buyers initiating serious pre-approval conversations much earlier in the process.
They are definitely off the sidelines.
Right. The people who were stubbornly sitting out have officially re-engaged. So I guess the question is, why now? If the rates haven't dramatically dropped, what is causing this scramble for chairs?
Well, the source identifies 4 main drivers for this. The first is that buyers are simply adjusting to current interest rates instead of waiting. The second is that inventory levels remain relatively tight in many areas.
Like you said, the lock-in effect.
Exactly. The third is pent-up demand from last year that is finally starting to release. But the fourth, and arguably the most important, is life events. Things like relocations, downsizing, upsizing.
So it's basically moving from elastic demand to highly inelastic demand.
Precisely. Last year, the market was full of elastic demand people who just wanted to move. Maybe they wanted a bigger yard or a slightly different neighborhood.
Sure.
When rates jumped, those speculative discretionary buyers just evaporated. They could afford to wait. But what we are seeing now is the return of the inelastic buyer. These are the people driven by unavoidable life events.
It reminds me of standing at the edge of a surprisingly cold swimming pool.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
Like last year, buyers walked up, dipped their toes in, got completely shocked by the chill of a 7% interest rate, and just retreated back to their lounge chairs to wait for the sun to warm it up.
Right, they just sat back down.
Exactly. But now, because of those life events you mentioned, they're just holding their breath and jumping into the cold water anyway. They aren't jumping in because the water got warmer.
No.
They're jumping in because they need to swim. Like if you have a new baby and you're in a tiny apartment, you have to get in the pool.
That is a perfect analogy. And we connect this to the bigger picture. It explains why human nature eventually overrides economic hesitations.
Yeah.
Human lives do not operate on a fiscal calendar. You can only put your life on hold for so long before your biological and social realities just take over.
I mean, life milestones don't care about the Federal Reserve.
Exactly. Marriage, divorce, new jobs, aging parents moving in there. These things demand physical space. So the pent-up demand from last year wasn't people deciding they no longer wanted to move. It was people trying to delay the inevitable.
And now the inevitable is here.
It's here. And the ultimate takeaway from this section of the source material is that the market isn't waiting anymore, and neither are buyers.
Wow. Okay, so the buyers are actively swimming in the cold pool. They are splashing around, aggressively competing for the few houses that are actually on the market. Let's bring this back to the listener who is perfectly dry. Like you are sitting on your back deck looking at your yard and you have absolutely zero plans to sell your house.
Non-sellers.
Right. So what does this all mean? If I'm not planning to move for another 5 to 10 years, why shouldn't I just ignore this entirely? Isn't it all just market noise to me?
This raises an important question, and it's something I hear all the time. But passive ignorance here is a massive financial misstep.
Okay, why?
Because increased buyer activity impacts you directly, even if you aren't moving. When necessity-driven buyers aggressively compete for limited inventory in your neighborhood, they are instantly rebaselining the comparable values for every single home on that street.
So my home might be worth more than it was last year, even though I did nothing.
Exactly. If 3 of your neighbors just overpaid for a house because they desperately needed a nursery or a home office, the financial ground beneath your lawn chair just shifted upward.
Okay, but I'm going to push back on that a little bit.
Go for it.
Sure, my net worth goes up on paper. I get a nice little ego boost knowing my house is worth more. But if I can't actually access that cash without selling my house, giving up my incredibly low mortgage rate, and buying another wildly expensive house at a 7% rate, isn't that equity essentially trapped?
But that's the trap right there.
What do you mean?
Viewing equity solely as money you get when you move is exactly the misunderstanding the source material warns against. That equity is not trapped if you understand financial leverage.
Okay.
Knowing your home's value isn't just about selling. It's about understanding your total net worth. Increased equity can provide a massive safety net or leverage for other financial decisions.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. How does a non-seller actually utilize that rebaseline value?
Let's say your home's value has spiked 20% over the last 2 years because of this new buyer calculus. That increased equity gives you significantly more borrowing power through instruments like home equity lines of credit HELOCs or home equity loans.
But wait, aren't the rates on HLOCs also terrible right now?
Well, they are higher than they used to be, yes. But let's look at the alternatives. Suppose you have $30,000 in high-interest credit card debt at, say, 24%.
Ouch. Yeah.
Or you are facing a massive tuition bill for a kid. Or you suddenly need a new roof. Leveraging your newly increased home equity to secure a loan at 8 or 9% is a massive financial victory compared to the alternatives.
Oh, I see.
You are using the newly created wealth in your home to restructure your broader debt profile without having to surrender the 3% primary mortgage on the house itself.
So you are basically keeping the cheap debt of the original mortgage, but siphoning out the new equity at a blended rate that still beats putting a renovation on a credit card.
Precisely. And beyond that, there's the psychological security. If you know definitively that your home equity has grown by $100,000, that completely changes your calculus on retirement timelines.
That makes total sense. It changes your entire risk profile.
Exactly. But you can't leverage that security or make those strategic financial decisions if you operate under the assumption that the market is frozen and your home's value hasn't moved. The biggest mistake homeowners make is assuming the market hasn't changed when it already has.
So treating your house just as a shelter rather than an active financial asset is the real mistake. I mean, you wouldn't just completely ignore your 401k for 5 years just because you aren't planning to retire tomorrow.
Right.
You monitor it so you know what your options are because options provide security.
Exactly. And in a shifting market, the homeowners with the most information are the ones who win. Timing is becoming a strategic advantage right now.
Okay, so let's say our listener is completely convinced. They're sitting on the couch, they realize that passive ignorance is a strategic mistake, and they want to know exactly how much leverage they currently have. How do they actually figure out where they stand without accidentally, listing their house or signaling to the world that they want to sell? Because the source material is incredibly specific about the right way to measure your hand in this market.
It is. The source stresses that getting a current home valuation is entirely about gaining clarity.
Mm.
You don't need to make a move today, but understanding your position gives you options.
So what does that clarity look like?
It answers 4 crucial questions.
Mm.
First, where do you stand today in terms of market value? Second, has your equity grown?
Right.
Third, would your specific home attract strong buyer interest right now? And fourth, if you did decide to move, what would that actually look like financially?
But there is a massive flashing neon caveat in the source material here.
There absolutely is.
It explicitly states that this has to be a real updated valuation, not an automated online estimate, not a guess. And I think that is a really hard habit for people to break.
It's very hard.
Because we are all so conditioned to just type our address into a massive real estate website and take whatever number spits out as the gospel truth.
And doing that in today's specific economic climate is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, it's like relying on a weather app to tell you if you need an umbrella, but the app only shows the historical average temperature for this month.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Like, it might tell you it's usually 60 degrees and sunny, but if you actually just look out the window, you can see that it's currently pouring rain on your street. The algorithm is technically analyzing data, but it's completely missing the reality on the ground.
What's fascinating here is that the algorithm cannot feel the humidity or notice the wind shifting, to use your analogy.
Exactly.
In real estate terms, an automated valuation model, an AVM, is entirely blind to the qualitative nuances that are driving buyer behavior right now. It can't evaluate the quality of the natural light. It doesn't know that you just spent $20,000 updating the kitchen.
Right, it just looks at bed-to-bath ratios.
Exactly. And more importantly, it doesn't understand hyper-localized micro-boundaries.
Oh, wait, what do you mean by micro-boundaries?
Well, an algorithm might pull comparable sales from homes a half-mile away, but what if those homes are in a slightly less desirable elementary school district?
Oh, wow, yeah.
Or what if your street has sidewalks and mature trees, while the street 2 blocks over backs up to a noisy commercial highway? In a market where buyers are purchasing out of sheer necessity, those qualitative details matter immensely.
Because a family moving specifically to get into a certain school district will trigger a bidding war on your street while completely ignoring the houses 2 blocks away.
Exactly. The algorithm just averages all those prices out, giving you a completely skewed number, which is why relying on bad data is actually worse than having no data at all.
I can see that, because bad data creates a false sense of security, right? Or unrealistic expectations.
Yes. It anchors your financial planning to a total fiction. True critical thinking requires seeking out actual on-the-ground data-backed insights. It has to be a real look at where the property stands.
So, in a market that has shifted this dramatically, you need actual boots-on-the-ground data.
You do.
All right, so to bring this all together for you listening,
Yeah.
we've charted quite a journey today through the new calculus of home value.
You really have.
We started by dismantling the myth of the frozen market. The market has quietly shifted from a waiting game to a highly active one. Buyers are jumping into the pool out of necessity because of life events, and they are accepting the new reality of higher rates.
Mm-hmm.
And because they are fiercely competing for limited inventory, they are artificially propping up and shifting localized home values. And whether you are planning to upsize, downsize, or just sit tight on your couch, having precise, data-backed clarity on your home's value transforms you from a passive bystander into an informed player with strategic options.
That's a perfect summary. And as you look around your own home and think about your own neighborhood, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We spent a lot of time discussing how buyers are now entering the market strictly out of necessity due to life events, rather than just looking for a pandemic-era change of scenery.
Right.
So if a buyer is driven by the urgent, immediate necessity of a life event, like a new baby or a sudden job transfer, how might that fundamentally shift the type of features they are willing to compete for?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting angle.
Right. I mean, if you have 2 months to relocate your entire life, you don't have the time or the capital to deal with a fixer-upper.
You just need a place to live right now.
Exactly. Will highly practical, move-in-ready family homes suddenly become these fiercely competitive battlegrounds? while luxury properties or project homes sit completely ignored.
Because the current buyer pool lacks the patience and the speculative cash.
Yes, it's a dynamic that could completely redefine what makes a home valuable in your own backyard. It shifts the premium from potential to immediate utility. And that is absolutely something to keep a close eye on in your neighborhood.
It really does change the very definition of what a desirable home is right now. Well, the heat is definitely turning up, and the pressure is changing the shape of the entire market. Keep your eyes open, ditch the automated estimates for real data, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.